of the state of Texas. The legislation before you has a history, as we talked about a moment ago, and I'm going to go specifically through the history of this particular bill. There was ample opportunity during the special session to move these pieces of legislation, and some did move, but the will of the legislature did not propel them timely through the process. And here are the basics about what happened to each of those. SB5 by Senator Hager was the 20-week abortion bill, filed on March the 5th. It was referred to State Affairs on March the 12th. It never received a Senate hearing. The House companion, House Bill 2364 by Representative Laubenberg, was filed on March the 5th, referred to State Affairs on March the 11th. A hearing was held on April 10th. It was reported out of House State Affairs on May the 2nd. The bill was sent to House calendars on May 7th, and it was never placed on the calendar. SB 97 by Senator Patrick regarding abortion-inducing drugs and regulations on the administration of those drugs was filed on November the 12th. It was referred to Health and Human Services on January 28th, and a Senate hearing was held on February 26th. It was reported out of the Senate Health and Human Service Committee on March 28th, but it died on the Senate intent calendar, and it died for the reason that I mentioned a moment ago, because a third of the members of this Senate who represented voices who deserve to be heard prevented the bill from coming forward. There was no House companion to that bill. SB 537 by Senator Dool related to the regulation of abortion facilities, requiring that they all have a standard met for ambulatory surgical centers. That bill was filed on February 13th. It was referred to Health and Human Services on February 20th. There was a Senate hearing on the bill on March 19th. It was reported out of committee on March 26th, and it died on the Senate intent calendar. Again, it died because a third of the members of this body made it so. There was no House companion filed to that bill. SB 1198 by Senator Taylor relating to hospital admitting privileges and the requirement that doctors who perform abortions have admitting privileges at a hospital within a certain distance. It was filed on March the 6th. It was referred to Health and Human Services Committee on March the 12th. The Senate hearing was held on April the 16th. It was reported out of committee on April 22nd, and it died on the Senate intent calendar for the reasons that I mentioned a moment ago, because a minority group of senators who represent voices across the state of Texas made it so. There was a House companion to that bill, HB 2816 by Representative Burkett. It was filed on March the 7th. It was referred to House State Affairs on March 18th. The House hearing was held on March 27th. It was reported out of committee on April 24th and sent to House calendars on April 26th, where it died. And how did we get here? Well, of course, we were called to a special session. And as I said, that session did not begin with the addition of this bill. It began with redistricting. On June the 10th, Governor Perry added transportation funding to the call, and of course the Democrats in this chamber had indicated our intention that we would vote to advance that bill were it placed before this one today. We understand that transportation is a priority. On June the 11th, these bills were filed. Several bills were filed, including also a bill by Senator Huffman, SB23, a bill again that the Democrats have indicated, were it taken up today before this bill, we would have joined our colleagues in passing it because we believe it's important. Governor Perry, of course, on that day also expanded the special session to include legislation relating to the regulation of abortion procedures, providers, and facilities. He also spoke in support of that call about the horrors of the national late-term abortion industry. He said that sadly some of those atrocities happen in our own state, and in Texas we value all life, and we've worked to cultivate a culture that supports the birth of every child. He said that we have an obligation to protect unborn children and to hold those who peddle abortions to standards that would minimize the death, disease, and pain that they cause. What he did not do was place on the call anything that would help to prevent unplanned pregnancy. What he did not do is place anything on the call that would aid women in making sure they never find themselves in need of the occasion that we meet here today to discuss. On that same day, the call was broadened again. The bills were referred and put on a fast track for a hearing the following day, leaving little to no advance notice for a public hearing. But fortunately, a procedural action forced the committee to wait an extra day, a tagging of the bill, allowing more Texans the opportunity to have their voices heard on these issues. Ultimately, the Republican leadership agreed to move only one bill on the Senate floor, and that was SB5, that is before us today. Before bringing the bill up, there was discussion amongst the majority, and the 20-week fetal pain portion of the bill was removed by Republicans before the bill was presented to us for our consideration on the floor. As you probably remember from that night, Democratic senators offered 17 amendments to the bill on the Senate floor to address concerns from stakeholders, primarily to address concerns, again, that prevention of abortion is the surest way, prevention of pregnancy is the surest way to decrease the demand for abortion. Included in those amendments were a request that we accept Medicaid funding from the federal level, which we knew would bring down a tremendous amount of money and assistance for women's health. Included in that was a full funding of the Women's Health Program, which provides a 90-to-10 match for uses of helping women who are in need of family planning services. But all of those amendments were rejected. The bill was voted out on party lines and then moved over to the House. The bill was received by the House on June 20th and was set for a public hearing the following day. The hearing also included HB16, which was the 20-week standalone bill, and HB60, the omnibus bill. Hundreds of Texans from all over the state appeared to testify at the hearing. But unfortunately, the hearing, which lasted sometime until the wee hours of the morning, 3:30 to 4 o'clock, was halted before all of the testimony was given by those who had waited, many of them from the prior morning, to voice their feelings on the bill. And it is my intention today to give them a voice by reading all of their testimonies on the Senate floor. In committee, SB5 was changed to include the section of the bill, the 20-week ban, that was removed in the Senate. also HB 60 and HB 61. On the House floor, there was minimal engagement and participation by the House author on the legislation. House Ds offered 13 amendments targeted at addressing concerns raised by stakeholders. All were rejected. And now we find ourselves here. This is the omnibus piece of legislation that contains these elements of bills that were filed in the 83rd session: the 20-week ban, the abortion-inducing drugs provision, the ambulatory surgical center standards, and the hospital admitting privileges. The alleged reason for the bill is to enhance patient safety, but what they really do is create provisions that treat women as though they are not capable of making their own medical decisions. They weaken standards of care because, as we all know, every member on this floor knows that the provisions of the ambulatory surgical center standards will immediately place 37 of the 42 abortion clinics in Texas out of compliance. And though the arguments on the Senate floor were made that the reason for those standards was for patient safety, not a single instance could be demonstrated to illustrate why those ambulatory surgical standards were important in assuring women's safety. Not a single example was provided where women had been provided a less safe atmosphere in the existing clinical setting today than they would receive in that setting. What this bill really does is to threaten the doctor-patient relationship. And we know that we received a great deal of information from doctors' groups, which I'll read into the record in a little while, about the intrusion on that relationship. And we know that in no other instance has this legislature chosen to place itself between a woman and her doctor or any patient and their doctor. We know that these additional standards are unnecessary. They're unsupported by scientific evidence, including unnecessary requirements that may be extremely difficult and in some cases impossible to meet without a basis in public health or safety. As we've been debating this issue, we have been reminded that there was a time in our country when only the wealthy could afford to access abortion services because they had the ability to travel to places that it was legal, and that women who didn't have that access to care were relegated either to carrying a pregnancy to term or, and very sadly, to some unsafe methods that they turned to try to address that need. And we know that women lost their lives over that. We also know in written testimony from the group, the National Obstetrics and Gynecologic Group, that their fear is the same thing is going to happen. In the state of Texas, through this bill, we are asking that women be forced to step back in history, back to a time when, once again, wealthy women who have the ability and the flexibility in their lives and their schedules to travel for these services will be accommodated, and women who will not will suffer a different and, unfortunately, probably in some instances, a life-threatening consequence.